Welcome to this special broadcast by NewsX. We have with us today Jordan Cope. He's the Qatari Finance Fellow at the Middle East Forum. Mr. Cope and his team accessed leaked documents that should change the discourse around terror funding and global terrorism. Over the course of the next half an hour, we dig deeper into the findings of these leaked documents and how they expose Qatar's terror funding across the globe and to various brotherhoods as well. Who are the beneficiaries and how Qatar whitewashed its role in bankrolling terrorism across the world? Mr. Cope, appreciate you joining us. The first question that in fact I want to ask you is you've made some serious allegations of the Qatari state giving billions of dollars to fund the Muslim Brotherhood regimes. What are these and how do you back these particular allegations that you have made? They're very serious.
And so it's always complicated to follow the stream of money, but mainstream media sources also document some of these trends as well. And so I've seen reports suggesting that the Qatari government has given terrorist organizations such as Hamas, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, anywhere between $1.1 billion to $1.8 billion since 2012. And of course, other governments get involved and help piecemeal everything together, but sometimes documents are leaked. In the circumstance, one such I was actually involved in. And so while at my time at the Middle East Forum, where I'm currently a Qatari Finance Fellow, there were documents that were revealed to the Middle East Forum that I personally helped translate. And these documents from the Qatari government ultimately indicated trends of using charity as a facade for financing Islamist organizations, in particular those affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. So for me, there are many ways to access these materials, one through mainstream media outlets and also through personal means, such as through translation work I help provide for the Middle East Forum.
All right, these are some serious allegations that you're making. And in your work, you've also written that links between Qatar's state-run e-charity and radical Islamic groups have spread into 7 continents. What exactly has your research revealed about the beneficiaries?
Right. And so I can personally say, as the one who supervised the translation, that the spreadsheet was very extensive, 45,000 grants distributed to charities in over 70 countries, billions of dollars in grants. And so just to understand, a lot of the charity financing ultimately targeted countries such as Pakistan and countries in the Middle East. They also happened at times to target countries such as India. And so there, in the Middle East Forum, there is a fellow, Abhinav Pandya, and he actually happened to write an article about the funding that went to Indian Salafi groups, in particular one such group in Kerala, where I believe approximately $5 million were distributed to. I believe it was the Salafi Philanthropic Trust. And so it is a big concern worldwide, Qatar using charity as a smokescreen for establishing ties to terrorist groups. And one such organization that proves this trend is Qatar's ties to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which does not engage in diplomatic measures. And so the reality of Qatar using charity to engage with a terrorist organization in the territories, in Israel and the Palestinian territories, it goes to show a lot. And that is ultimately that if Qatar is not using charity to promote diplomacy, it ultimately is using charity as a facade for its Islamist agenda, especially for the state that endorses a Salafi ideology.
Now, Mr. Cope, you've also found some links between Qatar's Eid charity and the Al-Qaeda in Peninsula offshoots, which are designated terrorist organizations.
Yes, and so I actually happened to write an article about this. And the basic findings was that, well, first and foremost, the founder of the Eid charity, or at least the founder in part, Abdul Rahman al-Nuaimi, actually is a designated terrorist by the United Nations, if I properly recall. But in addition to that, there were many affiliates of Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula that received funding, such as the Al Ihsan Charitable Society, received about $17.8 million, if I properly recall. And if I recall correctly, its founder has been accused of being in the Hazrami Council in the past. Other organizations include the Al Rahma Council and Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula affiliate, which is banned in the United States, and the Al Hikmah Al Yemeniya Society, which also is suspected of ties to Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But in addition to that, the ties aren't just a matter of accusation coming from NGOs, from think tanks. They do happen to also come from foreign governments as well, especially in the Arabian Peninsula, that have binded Qatar to such funding.
Mr. Cope, how has Qatar been able to, buy out the world's silence over its covert terror financing? It seems to be a big scale operation.
I think Qatar has done a lot of interesting initiatives. So first and foremost, there's always the world of sport. And so oftentimes throughout Qatari history, you see a trend of controversial state behavior coupled with the smokescreen of soft power initiatives, whether that be through helping expedite and bring into being one of the world's best renowned airlines, Qatar Airways, which of course has a lot of flight routes to South Asia. On top of that, through media, the Al Jazeera network is a state-sponsored Qatari media network. And for those interested in India, AJ, which often refers to terrorists and organizations such as Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as martyrs, often happens to also have negative media coverage attention in regards to India, trying to bind India as an occupier of Kashmir. And so you see a lot of different initiatives along the way to promote Qatari agenda, funding US universities, $5 billion to date to American universities, and all these typical outlets and agenda. And so Qatar knows really well how to massage global powers. And it's one of the biggest lobbyers in terms of the United States government, ranking in the top 10 of foreign powers to spend in lobbying fees in the United States. Also to mention, the Qataris have done a great job of reconciling and maintaining ties with the United States through its help in the Gulf War, but also through allowing the United States to locate its CENTCOM military base in Al Udeid. And so they help establish a lot of ties with the West, and they try to appeal primarily to the youth through means that are not political to help forge a good perception of what Qatar is, even though its Islamist agenda and malign activity behind the scenes often don't coalesce.
Mr. Cope, Qatar for the longest time has denied aiding jihadist groups such as Al Qaeda and IS. But your research is proving to be otherwise of the financial trail that you've been able to establish. But what's the next logical step now?
I think it's tricky. There are certainly ties between Qatar and Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. It should also be noted that during the Syrian civil war, Qatar actually provided aid to Ahrar al-Sham, which coordinated attacks with an offshoot of Al Qaeda, both Jabhat al-Nusra. I believe the organization's name is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And so what is to be done? There's a big argument about this. One side says that we should use the World Cup and Qatar's soft power initiatives as a means of raising awareness instead of canceling it. Other proponents offer and outspokenly believe that we should completely cancel the World Cup, that we should boycott the World Cup. I think whatever we choose to do, it is of prime importance not to let these next coming months go to waste. The world needs to realize the damage that Qatar has caused around the world by supporting Islamist proxies around the Middle East and North Africa in civil wars that have to date almost killed approximately 1 million people just because of Yemen and Syria alone. The consequences are dire. The world is talking about a lot of wrong Qatar is doing, especially in regards to its labor rights, and its treatment of gay people in the country. And those matters are important in and of their own right, but also of importance, and that needs to be discussed, is Qatar's Islamist financing and its backing of Islamist groups in the proxy wars throughout the Middle East.
Right, Mr. Kopp, you spoke about smoke screens. How does Qatar use its state-owned broadcaster Al Jazeera to push false narratives, and how can that be countered?
It's a very important point that you bring up. And so at one point in the Iraq war, there was an article published in The Guardian by an Al Jazeera journalist. And he identified himself, whether jokingly or not, as an Islamist journalist, and essentially mentioned that Qatar was the only media outlet telling the truth about the war. And of course, there were ugly consequences regarding the war. But interestingly the article was published within days of the war being initiated. So not a fair enough amount of time to really judge the war itself. That being said, what we need to understand is that Al Jazeera regularly refers to terrorist organizations as martyrs and their members as martyrs. One such member was regarded by Al Jazeera Mubashir as a martyr, and he happened to be Yahya Ayash, the former chief bomb maker for Hamas. And so Al Jazeera certainly has an agenda. It's to normalize terrorists wherever they might be. It is to promote an Islamist agenda. And it's to no surprise that this country that happens to do so also happens to be the country that reportedly harbored Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind 9/11, and had him on a government payroll. And so what needs to be done about these organizations? Well, one, it needs to be established that Al Jazeera and its affiliates, such as Al Jazeera Plus, are Qatari state-sponsored and state-financed. And so their agenda will reflect that of the self-identifying, or perhaps not self-identifying, but endorsing Salafi state. On top of that, we need to be made aware of AJ Plus, an outlet that's now targeting many millions of young millennials, trying to help propagate Qatar's agenda in the form of a progressive agenda, or at least a progressive appearing agenda. We need to understand Al Jazeera's ties to the Middle East Eye, where allegedly former journalists from Al Jazeera have moved over to work. And we also need to understand Qatar's work in the past of sponsoring think tanks, in addition to American universities. Qatar is certainly trying to cultivate young minds, and we need to be wary of that. And I do believe that Al Jazeera was recently classified, or at least needed to register under FARA for, in essence, a means of registration for foreign outlets in the United States that have state agenda affiliated. But we need to be aware of this, and the youth need to be aware of this, especially as the World Cup impends.
Mr. Kopp, last question before we let you go. Can a real solution to problem states like Qatar come from within? You know, something like this, an embargo, a diplomatic embargo, took place in 2017. It ended in 2021. But do you think that's enough for Qatar to mend its ways?
Properly heard the question correctly. I definitely think the United States and other states need to take more of a role. Qatar assumes a lot of power, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and just signed a gas deal with Europe rather recently, and it maintains one of the largest gas resources outlets in the world. And especially the United States assumes a role because Qatar's influence is strong in the United States. And there was talk, at least during the Al-Ula agreement and beforehand, that a potential condition would have been to have ended media wars in the region. And so assuming that that proposed condition, whether it actually was materialized or not, assuming that that condition was important, it becomes especially important for countries, democratic countries in particular, to exercise their voices, to raise awareness to Qatar's abuses around the world, especially the United States, also perhaps that of India, which maintains an important role in South Asia, in Asia in general, and the greater world. And so I think, just to answer that question in particular, yes, global nations need to stand up. The United States in particular needs to stand up because of it having normalized Qatar's controversial behavior over the years.
Mr. Cope, appreciate you joining us and filling us in on this very serious and broad topic.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.